Have you ever enjoyed playing dress up or wearing a mask for some reason? Maybe you're wearing a mask or a costume right now. Let's talk about it. As we come to the close of this life group season, in worship and here in life groups, we've been talking about the question, who's in and who's out? It's a question that is asking who will be in heaven after life here on earth is done for us. It's a rather important question and conversation for us. So hopefully you've been able to be part of the worship services and our life group discussions. Today I want us to look at this idea not from the standpoint of what we have to do to get in, but instead, what should our day-to-day lives look like if we are in? And what might it look like if we are not fully there yet? We're going to look at this as we compare what a fan versus a follower of something or someone might look like. We all know what a fan of a sports team can look like. Yeah. When Jesus was walking the earth, in the midst of his teaching, was Jesus looking for fans or was he looking for followers? And what would the difference be? Tell you what, before we get into the meat of this discussion and look at one of Jesus' stories, why don't you pause here and begin the discussion with these two questions and then push play. There are many places throughout the Bible, and especially in the Gospels, where we find the stories and teachings of Jesus, where God shares the understanding that he is looking for followers and not fans. God is not looking for people to be sitting on the sidelines, simply appreciating God. Good job, God. Way to go. Your work on that cross, awesome. Raising from the dead, unbelievable. And that Christmas story, so heartwarming. And I love all that teaching and cool stuff that you do. Keep it up, God. God is also not wanting people to be wearing masks or costumes, making it look like they follow, but ultimately, they too are just fans. Dressing up, painting their faces, Jesus speaks about those people many times when he uses the word hypocrites. These are people who say that they are one thing, and at times they may look the part, but at other times, their heart, their words, their actions are quite different. There were many times and places when Jesus referred to the teachers of the law, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as these kinds of people, the fake, hypocritical fans. And that was crazy for those who were listening. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were the in crowd. In answering the question of who's in and who's out, most people would have instantly pointed to the religious leaders as the in crowd. But what would Jesus say? Did Jesus see them as fans or as followers? I want us to look at one of the most powerful moments that Jesus shares with those religious leaders. Some of us like to think of Jesus as a guy with lots of love for others, and he does love others. But in this part of the story, he lets those religious leaders have it. He shares his frustration. 7 different times he says the words, "Woe to you." In that time period, that was not a nice thing to say that to another. Jesus is actually rejecting them when he says this. Jesus helps to demask them. It's out of Matthew 23, which is just a short time right before the same crowd of people would help to get Jesus killed. Let's see what Jesus has to say.
The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and to have men call them rabbi. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. And when he becomes one, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools! Which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? You also say, if anyone swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift on it, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And he who swears by the temple swears by it and by the one who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by God's throne and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides! You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee! First clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. In the same way, on the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we had lived in the days of our forefathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of the sin of your forefathers. You snakes! You brood of vipers! How will you escape being condemned to hell?
Wow. Did you see that coming from Jesus? He was pretty fired up, wasn't he? And truthfully, he does get fired up about this topic. Jesus looked at these religious leaders, and with all that they knew, he had hoped that they would have followed him. These guys would have thought that they were in, and so would have most of the people that watched them live. But Jesus was not thinking the same thing. Jesus was seeing them as out, or at least not fully in. These guys knew a lot about God, but they did not really know God. They did a lot of the things that God would want them to do, but they were not doing them for the right reasons. They were doing them so that they would look good, so that others would notice. And they were hoping that God would reward them because they were doing those things. That group called the Sadducees, they were the group in the church who were born into it. Their families throughout the years were always churchy people. So they looked churchy on the outside, and at least when they were at church. But at other times and in other places, they were missing the mark. They looked more like the world than they would have want you to believe. They were fans of God because of being churchy, but they were not following God's heart because they really didn't know God's heart. And another group, the Pharisees, they thought that they were in because they knew God's rules and they practiced them at a high level. But like Jesus said, they missed the bigger picture. They followed the little rules in front of others and looked good doing it, but they were not loving those others. They were so busy doing what they thought were God's things, yet they missed out on being with God. What were the two biggest commands of God? What did Jesus share? Love God with all, not just a little, not just once in a while. Love God with all of your heart, your mind, and your soul. And love others in the same way that Jesus loved us. And that was with all of himself. So if we're part of the in crowd, if we are followers and not just fans of Jesus, what should that look like in our personal lives with Jesus? What should that look like in our relationships? What should it look like in our driving? What about our finances? In our time management? What about technology? Love Jesus all the time. Love others all the time. That's following Jesus. It's not easy, but it's powerful. And if we figure it out, we will continue to become who we were created to be. Spend some time discussing these last couple of questions, and I will see you on Sunday as we continue this discussion of being a follower and not just a fan of Jesus.